mountains suffering essentially because the weather forecasts were, of course, so bad. So if we go back to the early 1980s, I would have been in 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. And at the time, today, high schoolers, junior high schoolers, elementary schools, they can look at all of this weather data online, in part because of what Unidata has done. But back in the 80s, you couldn't do that. If you could do it, you'd have very limited observations. You'd have low resolution models. At the time, the operational model was the LFM, run at about 190 kilometer grid spacing. So the forecasts were awful. And there was, like I said, for a person who did a lot of backpacking, there was a lot of pain and suffering. And, the only way that I could look at weather data at that time was through the Weather Channel. And it'd be fun to look at something from the Weather Channel in 1983. I'm just going to play this because it's worth it for about 20 seconds. So let's see if this is going to work.
Important weather developments are always occurring. You always know what's happening in your town on the Weather Channel. The official local forecast for your community appears 12 times each hour, direct from the National Weather Service forecast office nearest you, computerized, delivered by satellite to your community, your cable company, and your home in seconds. Forecasts you need for the next 36 to 48 hours.
So you get some idea there in about 1983 of what the state of the art was. And that is also when Unidata came to become a group.
Important weather.
Sorry about that. So let's talk about Unidata in 1983. In 1983, there's a workshop held at the University of Wisconsin. 80 U.S. meteorology and atmospheric sciences departments sent representatives. It was at that meeting that the phrase Unidata was coined, which meant a combination there of university and data. And a key outcome of that workshop was they recommended that UCAR establish and govern Unidata to provide access to current and archived weather data, satellite images, and forecasts, support interactive computer capabilities at universities, and develop communication capabilities between universities, NCAR, and NASA. And it was a year later, 1984, that Unidata was officially formed, and their first newsletter came out on the 14th of December of 1984, and in it, it said that formal notification was received today from the National Science Foundation that a grant has been approved for UCAR's Unidata Phase 2 project, which was essentially the creation of the Unidata Program Center. And David Folker was named the program manager. And kind of an interesting aspect of Unidata is it's 40 years old, and it has only had, to my knowledge, 2 directors, which would be David and Mohan, which is pretty incredible amount of stability in the Unidata program, probably to the benefit of our whole community. But there were some other things in there, and in particular, the importance of the community. And there's a statement that says, to ensure the strongest possible relationship between the Unidata project office and the academic community, a management advisory committee has been established comprising of John Dutton at Penn State, Vern Sumi at Wisconsin, Dick Orville at Albany, and Bob Wilhelmson at Illinois. So that was the predecessor of, I don't even know what Polcom is called anymore, I'm sorry, but of kind of the governing committees. But then also there were 4 chairs of these Phase 2 working groups that were created. And those chairs were Cliff Mast, Ernest Agee, Christopher Cooper, and David Folker. And so this was the kind of the beginnings, I would suspect, of what we call the user committee. This was back in 1984. And it's interesting to look now, by 1985, they issued this grand design plan, which has, really lasted, despite all of the upheavals that we have in IT, has largely lasted for 40 years. And the basic idea was a combination of global data access, long-haul communications, and you see NSFNet here, predecessor of the internet listed, local services with a local area network, and local interactive processing and graphical display. And, you could modify this a little bit today for cloud computing, but for the most part, this has been a pretty stable and successful design now for 40 years. By 1987, Unidata was really starting to run, and this is kind of interesting to look at their newsletter from then. They say that they have 6 test sites that successfully demonstrated the usability of PC Mercatus. Some of you may remember that. Successful testing of our prototype LDM. So, the LDM is still running today, and they were prototyping that almost 40 years ago. Unidata will be testing and evaluating a working CDF, or Common Data Format System, in early December. We still have NetCDF today. And then you can see, like, one of the issues, or one of the kind of the challenges at Unidata has always been to figure out what platforms can we do support on. You can see back in 1987, MS-DOS, Unix, or VMS, the choice is yours. So these were the three operating systems back then, although you might remember there were a couple of others as well. So by 1989, I was a new meteorologist. I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Penn State then, and this photo was taken at my graduation, so you can see the classic map room with all the sheets hanging on the wall. For most of my career, that was how we did forecasting. And it was only, around 1989 that the benefits of Unidata were really starting to pay off, because by the time I got to the University of Washington for graduate school that year, I was able to access weather observations and satellite imagery on computers. And I got my first email address in 1989 too, which is something I like to tell my kids, although they think email is outdated completely anyway. Another thing that happened in 1989 was Russell L. DeSouza became actively involved in Unidata, representing Millersville University. I'd never met Russell, which is really unfortunate because he sounds like a really good guy. He served on the users and the policy committees. And in particular, it's noted that he represented the interests of small colleges and universities, which I think is something that has greatly benefited the Unidata program over a long time. And, if you look at the names that came up earlier in the earlier formation of Unidata, they were mostly people, and especially really high-powered people from large universities. But Unidata program, and we've gotten tremendous benefit from smaller schools as well. And I would say that education, the diversity of education at all these different institutions, large institutions, small institutions, is something that benefits our profession as a whole. So a quick shout out there for Russell and what he did in that regard. Okay, kind of getting back to my career a little bit, in 1995, in the early 90s, there were a couple of universities, Penn State, Colorado State, University of Washington, that began running real-time mesoscale models. This was kind of a new thing to do, something we would take for granted today, but it wasn't so much, it was a very difficult thing to do in the 90s. And you can see this quote from Mass et al. The initial evaluations completed by myself were so promising that in 1995, a real-time prediction system was created using a single 27-kilometer domain of the MM5. And, to put this together, Mark Albright and I did a lot of the coding, along with Mark Stalenga, guidance from Cliff, Mass. And the LDM and NetCDF were really critical tools to allow this to happen. And I jokingly, right here at Forecast, were posted on the web. We used NCSA Mosaic to do that. That was the first real web browser. And I think we were producing graphics on that back in around 1994 from the version of the MM5 we were running in real time. But, it wasn't easy to do that. And in particular, we were using highly degraded model grids for initial conditions. And in 1998, Cliff, Mass, and Bill Kuo came out with a paper where they talked about some of the challenges. And in particular, they noted improved university access to NSF model grids was needed. And here's where Unidata stepped in and came up with a solution, which we called Conduit at the time, which stand for the Cooperative Opportunity for NSF Data Using IDD Technology. And the idea was to be able to send higher resolution model grids to the universities. And, we still have this problem today. We're trying to analyze 82 member ensemble based on the European EPS system and the GEFs, and this is still very hard to do today. It's just the volumes of data get bigger and bigger. A Conduit was a great solution for that. And that also benefited some of my work when I came to the University of Utah. One of the first things that I got involved in was weather support for the 2002 Olympics. And ironically, we have the Olympics now in 2034. So perhaps I'll finish my career working on the Olympics as well. And for the 2002 games, we produced a real-time version of the MM5 predecessor to the WRF at 4-kilometer grid spacing. We did what we didn't know were called machine learned forecasts at the time, but we did machine learned forecasts for all of the outdoor venues and other locations. John Horrell's group here developed MesoWest, which today integrates observations from I don't know how many tens of thousands of stations across the United States. And behind all this were a lot of Unidata tools. We see LDM again, NetCDF, Conduit. But also for the Olympics, we tested something that I think came out of NOAA Esrel at the time, the Earth Systems Research Lab. I'm not sure what they've renamed that now, but it was a predecessor basically to CAVE. It was basically a lightweight version of AWIPS that ran on a laptop and accessed data remotely. So there was a lot of neat stuff that happening that kind of ultimately helped probably with the development of K for Unidata. So in 2006, Steve Buchinger came up with the idea that we would have a Unidata policy committee meeting in Hawaii. And there was unanimous support for this. You might be surprised. But we all went to Unidata, and Linda Miller sadly passed away not too long ago. And she was, the whole time I was at Unidata, she was incredibly helpful. And she was really big on bringing communities together to solve problems and would make all the connections to do that. She was the community service manager. And I just want to point out something else that has really benefited the user committee we take for granted today. Building off of Conduit, Linda and Unidata worked on this craft project, which was basically to give everybody access to level 2 radar data. So as I would put it, you want level 2 radar data, including an archive, you've got it. In fact, prior to this, a lot of the level 2 data was lost. You know, it was never even archived. And she worked with Kelvin Drogemeyer, the National Weather Service, the UPC, NCDC at the time, to make this go through. And so we all are able, of course, to look at level 2 data today, polarimetric radar data in real time. We can use it in the classroom, which is really great. But that was a big deal back then. And for me personally, the nice thing about this is having access to all these radar archives of level 2 data, which allows you to do various types of climatology with the radar data. And for my group, that's been a lot of work on lake effects. So that's how Unidata has, again, feeded back into my group, the development of my graduate students. Now, the other thing that was happening in 2006 was things that we're using today were really in their early development stages. So we had Threads that was beginning to develop, and I went back through the notes there. We were working on the Unidata 2008 proposal at that time, and there's a quote there. It says, Threads is a key element in support of Unidata 2008 proposal. And at the time, I think it was Don Murray released IDV 2.0. So we're getting now to the early stages of the integrated data viewer. And then also in 2006, there was a Unidata summer workshop, which, you know, there's been many of these, and these are really great. At the time, we were talking about using models as educational tools. And there's a good quote down here that says, oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me get this back up. We must pool our resources and share our software, methodology, and presentation so that others may be able to include them in their own classes. And that's a great kind of mantra, both back then and today. Okay, to kind of wrap things up now and move things into the present, 2015, MetPy was under development. This was after I was really actively involved in Unidata Policy Committee. And at the time, there's a quote there from this 2015 report. MetPy is an open source project aimed at providing Pythonic library for meteorological data analysis that meshes well with the rest of the scientific Python ecosystem. And, you know, as a joke, I guess a little bit here, 2023, I'm the old dog learning new tricks, and we have a lot of Python code in my group, and there's my name on it. But also, you'll know MetPy here and needs that CDF to produce amazing graphics like you see here on the right. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a powered by, and there's a few groups there you might have heard of, but also Unidata. You know, behind the scenes, when I was on the policy committee, in the 1980s, there was a company called BASF, and their motto was, we don't make the products you buy, we make the products you buy better. And we always said that was a great motto for Unidata. So now, how do we get to 50 years of Unidata in me? I have a few comments now about thinking about the future. So let's think about Unidata 2034. Will I be around then? I hope so, of course. But a quick comment. As I see it, Unidata is going to have to transform more in the next 10 years than they did in the previous 40. I mean, we are seeing right now, I think, some of the most dramatic and disruptive change in how we do weather forecasting of my entire career. The advances in artificial intelligence, the fact that the private sector now is fully engaged in weather prediction and in many ways is doing some of the most innovative work is pretty exciting. But that also means that we're going to be dealing with really big change in the next 10 years. And as a quick comment, though, for all of us who are in education, is higher ed is also going to have to change more in the next 10 years than it did in the previous 40 years. We have huge challenges, changing demographics, declines in the college populations. We're going to have to basically provide education in ways more online, ways that are less expensive. But of course, in both of these cases, there are tremendous opportunities. But what we must not change is maintaining this quote from 1983 or 84, that the strongest possible relationship between the Unidata Project Office and the academic community. That must continue. So let's do this together. And I would happy to end there and maybe have a little bit of discussion about the past of Unidata, the current of Unidata, and the future of Unidata. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. That was super interesting. I love those old historical pictures and just thinking through the amazing progress that we've made in our field. So thank you for sharing all that. This is a time of open discussion, questions and answers. So I'm happy to open the floor if you want to use the raise hand feature, ask Jim some questions. We have lots of time for this, so don't be shy.
And I didn't want to give a long talk because I knew it would bore everybody, but I was quite surprised to actually see it's only 3:20. So I guess I could do a dance if need be. So Mohan has a question or a comment. Go ahead, Mohan.
Hi, Jim. Congratulations, and great to see you online today. We saw each other in person a few months ago. Well, Bill and I were visiting your program. Great talk. Down the memory lane. It brought back lots of memories of lots of different things. And the last quote you showed is basically emblematic of what Unidata has always aspired to be and what it should continue to be, in terms of maintaining the strong connection between the program center and the community at large. So kudos to you for pulling this all together for this wonderful talk. We were chatting a little bit earlier this morning about the big trends that are influencing Unidata and our community. And I mentioned the same thing that you mentioned, and that is the importance of AI and ML in how it's going to transform every walk of life, including academia, education, research, forecasting, and whatnot. And I also want to thank you for all your years of service to our program, over many long years, and your continued contributions, to the Unidata, advancing the Unidata program through your work with the IDV. I don't know if you have had any chance to look at your map list emails that have been dropping in in the last hour.
I saw
the IDV. So, I was talking about the importance of a tool like that, in the community. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for everything you have done for us.
Yeah, great. I see Yuan is on too. I see his avatar. So I thank him. He's been extremely helpful for me over the years. And IDV, the 3D visualization is something that my students get super excited about because it's not something that you see much of online. And I have found that teaching concepts about the relationship between the upper levels and the lower levels, potential vorticity thinking, and being able to visualize the dynamic tropopause, for example, three-dimensionally with an isosurface is really helpful. And those are some of the classes that my students comment the most about learning the most, which is, of course, what we're all here for. So a quick shout out to everybody that's worked on that, especially Yuan.
One other story from the Hawaii committee meeting that you had a photo of, if you remember, you and I went for a run that morning, and I
Yes.
don't run as fast anymore.
No, I don't run at all. I had to give up running about 10 years ago. So I'm in the pool a lot, and I like to joke how much I hate swimming, but every time I go over there, it's wet. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and tell us your story.
Oh, no, that was the story.
And don't let him on. He's a very fast runner. He's, I couldn't keep up with him. So even if he says if he's still running some, he can probably go out and outrun most of you. So don't let him fool you.
Jim.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm sure you'll remember that I gave a talk at the Hawaii meeting as a new faculty member since I had set up a thread server, and Steve Businger said, "Do you know anything about NetCDF and threads? Can you come talk to this committee?" But anyway, thank you again for your talk. It was extremely interesting, and this discussion about AI ML has come up a lot. But my sort of impression from the outside is that the progress that was made in things like data services really came out of the domain science and the need to access data. And now it seems like it's shifting, and it's more coming from computer science background. And, all these AI ML things are really, at least at our university, come out of computer science, and they're looking for an application. And so the struggle that we have is, where do you recruit students that are interested, in my case would be oceanography or atmospheric science, or do you recruit from the computer sciences and get them interested in the field? I'm just curious on your perspective on that.
That's a good question. I got a couple of thoughts about that. First of all, I'll talk about my students that are leaving our program. So especially my PhD students.
Graduating, right? Not
Graduating, yeah, like in the last few years, or about to graduate. They have incredible job opportunities that didn't exist when I was finishing. And I was doing real-time numerical weather prediction as a graduate student, right? But at the time, there was no place I could go and do that in the private sector. Today, there's tons of companies that they can go and do that. And my last 4 PhD students, 3 of them are working in the private sector. And one of them is like head of meteorology for Amazon Prime Air, for example. Okay. And he works with all his computer scientists, but they need the domain knowledge, right? They need a meteorologist, but somebody who can also do the computer science work. And the others are at Spire, or I think Maxtor. I can't remember the name of the company exactly. And most of my graduate students now want to go in the private sector. They see it as an exciting place to be and a good place to make money. But you're right. I think the change is now, the disruption is not coming from our profession, but it's coming from outside of it. I mean, Google, NVIDIA, these are companies now, they're producing competitive, ML-based model forecast systems, MLWP, if that's what you want to call it. I mean, they can't do everything yet, but they've very quickly filled the gap there. And in some respects, maybe they're best equipped to do the disruption. It's sometimes people from outside the field that have the most courage, or maybe the naivete is actually an advantage, right? For them to just try something new that maybe some of us wouldn't dive right into. So I think that's pretty exciting, but like you said, it's going to be a bit of more of a challenge. I mean, but also opportunities, like, AWS and other cloud services now have all kinds of meteorological data on them. And, that's great for us, because, it's like, if I want a 14-year archive of the HER to be able to do machine learning, it's there on AWS. They're supporting that. And that's not a bad thing, but we could think about where we can fit to grease the skids for researchers or students to be able to take advantage of that. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but that's a couple of perspectives. For me personally, I still like working with meteorologists who could code rather than coders I have to develop meteorological skills with.
Yeah.
But I'm a synoptic meteorologist and a weather geek at heart. But, if the right person comes into my office and they're highly motivated, I'm fairly agnostic about what their degree is, and as long as they can contribute. And so, yeah, I mean, I've had physics majors and other people that have come into my group. And so, but I would say for me, it's actually a little bit of a challenge right now. I'm actually kind of scared about how fast things are changing. I mean, it's as soon as I feel like we're getting caught up in one area, somebody comes out with a paper and I feel like they're 5 years ahead of us now. It's really pretty, it's both exciting, but also a period of rapid change.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
A quick comment on that. The one thing I learned when I first started going to committee meetings with Unidata is how challenging it is for a group like Unidata to both be an innovator, but also a supporter. Those two things can be complementary, but you only have so many people. And, we do live in challenging budget times. And so, when you're doing support, sometimes it's taking away from innovation. And when you're doing innovation, sometimes it hurts support. And one of the things we talked about a lot when I was on user committee and policy committee was basically, how do you balance those things? I suspect that hasn't changed at all at Unidata. It's still a big challenge for them. And, underpinning all that too is when I was going through all these older documents, I saw the names of people that I had known on those committees that had been at Unidata for 20 or 30 years. Linda Miller, Ben Domenico, David Fulker, Tom Yaxis. I mean, these are people that were totally invested in the program and were involved for a long time. And there's still people like that at Unidata, but the whole tech world is one of rapid transformation. If you don't get a new job somewhere else after 2 years, they think something's wrong with you. And so that's another challenge, is it's driving the cost, the prices up and everything else. And so going through that document, I realized how fortunate we were to have stability for a long period of time, but I think things are going to be even more disruptive moving forward, and that'll be a big challenge.
I can jump into the question. No one else is going to raise their hand right away. I was curious if you could speak to, it's hard to give a forecast, right, about what the next 10 years are going to be, but I agree with you. And so I'm curious on what your perspectives are on how you see things changing in the classroom and maybe in your own research.
Yeah, well, the Niels Bohr quote, forecasting is very difficult, especially with respect to the future.
Yes. But I'm curious on what your thoughts are. Yeah.
I don't envy Mohan for having to think about what's going to happen 5 years from now. I can remember somebody once told me about strategic planning. If we knew what we were going to be doing 5 years from now, we'd be doing it now. And but yeah, I think I would expect a lot of stuff moving into the cloud, whether we want to or not. And when I say that, I mean, for example, our administration does not want to support a lot of centralized computing resources anymore. And we've had a lot of times where they've been pushing us to migrate into the cloud more. And in some respects, it makes sense, but there is also a lot of challenges there in terms of, well, how can I pay for data stores down the road that I don't have a grant for? I won't have a grant for, say, in another year or two. But I would think that we're going to see more of that for sure. A lot of students don't even use laptops anymore. I have a lot of students that are just using tablets for everything. I don't even know how to interface some of what we do into that environment. For the online class that I teach, which has an enrollment of almost 500 students, I'm actually required to make everything work on any device, and meteorology is very visual. And so I'm always thinking about a 32-inch monitor or something like that, but the requirements are for them to be able to take the class literally working on a smartphone. And how do you design that? Those are the kind of things we run up against. But I think that things are just going to change a lot with the migration into the cloud. In 10 years, I would think that the best modeling systems in the world might be run by the private sector. I don't know that for sure, but I would think that would be the case. And I would think there was an article I saw today, I think it was in the Washington Post, talking about a model that NOAA's using that was developed by a private company. And there's other private companies that are upset that they can't get a hold of it. And I think we will see a little more friction along those lines moving forward in time. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity too. I mean, just think about the opportunities to get our students involved in the private sector and that sort of thing. My father was an engineer. He worked for GE for 42 years. And so when I was a kid, I grew up in a family that people worked in the private sector, and I was always a little disappointed that there weren't a lot of jobs in the private sector when I came out of school. So I'm pretty excited about that as a development for our profession. So yeah, I see somebody's got a comment there on how the ML models stack up. I don't know if you're referring to Google's and NVIDIA's there. I know ECMWF is working with them, and you know, for some of the basic mass fields, 500 millibar heights, that sort of thing, their machine learned products are doing quite well. The question is going to, you know, as they go down, like for me in complex terrain, the hard part is, do you have training data sets and those kinds of things? And that's a big challenge for, say, precipitation in complex terrain.
Yeah, I'm interested because I'm curious how NOAA, at least from my perspective, NOAA and like what the Weather Service does is probably going to be quite different in the next 10 to 20 years. And so how does that feed into, like, do we need to teach QG or PV thinking or things like that? Like what's that forecasting role going to be? And again, it's really tough to forecast the future, but I find that maybe a topic of discussion that will come up the next several years.
That's something we've been talking about here because we're thinking about, you know, we have a synoptic meteorology class, which probably everybody teaches with different flavors. But we also have a weather forecasting class and like an advanced synoptic meteorology class. And we're thinking about throwing both of them out and replacing them with a high-level weather forecasting class in which students would do some kind of traditional forecasting, but they would also develop machine learning models that can forecast the weather, for example, and not just like sensible weather at certain locations, but also be able to predict, for example, things like smoke transport, smoke emissions and transport, say in the Western United States. So environmental problems that are important that might pull in people from other disciplines. And so I don't know where that's all going to go, but that's one of the things we're building. We're kind of thinking about transforming weather forecasting from like a traditional forecast class to one where it's more of you're a forecast system developer. And, you know, one of my former students at Amazon Prime, his comment is they don't want humans doing anything other than prepping everything, but everything has to be automated in the long run. And so that's the kind of class we've been thinking about trying to develop. And when you think about trying to do that, you need training data sets. The students need to be able to access all of these things. And it'll be interesting to see if we can pull that off. So.
Especially in light of GS 1340. Tom.
Yeah, hi, Jim. I'm definitely talking my own book here with this question. I'm do machine learning training at Unidata. Your institution, do you see machine learning in the atmospheric Met world? That training, is that going to be more structured in your department? Is that going to be pushed up? I know that people are usually course limited, 1340 limited.
Yeah.
Instructor time limited, and so it's like, is it already a tug of war of we can drop this to do that, or they just need to pick up machine learning and research off time, summer internships somewhere outside of your institutional walls?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're getting it from bottom up and top down. Top down is, I think, what they call responsible AI. Our administration is like one of the 3 primary areas they want to invest in over the next 5 years. And I mean, right now, if you want to come to the University of Utah, you can get on as much as $150,000 a year to come here and work with us for living expenses or something completely insane like that. So there's this happening on this big scale. You know, the computer sciences department, we have this what is it called? The Ski Institute. You know, they have a big heavyweight in AI there, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. So that's happening from the top down. But also, you know, the younger faculty we're bringing in, you know, they're growing up in an environment where they're using machine learning. And so they're starting to infuse that into our curriculum, which is really good. You know, you can have classes that are completely dedicated to machine learning, but also the idea of just, you know, putting it into every class or putting it into several classes. I've always kind of looked at synoptic meteorology as being, I call it synthesis meteorology. Basically, it's about synthesizing all of this stuff together. Yep. And I would say machine learning is something I want to bring in the synoptic meteorology because it's so important for the future of synoptic meteorology. So we have that going on. We do have the usual internal squabbles, you know, that we have. We're in the College of Science now. The math department wants a certain level of turf there in terms of machine learning. And we've tried to argue that applying machine learning in the discipline or cross-disciplinary with people who understand the domain is actually super important, rather than taking a generic math class. We don't think that will be successful for meteorology students. We think it would be more successful for them to work on machine learning for meteorology, oceanography, whatever. So those are things that are happening here at the University of Utah. And it's kind of funny for me because, you know, that's not my background. I'm not a statistician, but I jokingly say that I've done machine learning for over 20 years, but simple stuff. And it's kind of funny to go to meetings as if this has never happened on campus before. And another thing that used to come up in, I don't know, maybe Unidata means, I can't remember, but I always said that meteorology is the original big data science. And it's just something probably people have thrown around there. And in some respects, model output statistics, which was, you know, developed by Bob Glahn and collaborators back in the late 60s, essentially was, you know, a machine learning approach. It's just we didn't call it that back then. It's obviously not as sophisticated as deep learning techniques and that sort of thing, but yeah, it's been used in meteorology for a long time.
So in light of, you know, this conversation around AI, ML, all those types of things, and then thinking back to the, you know, roles of the committees of Unidata over the years, you know, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on, you know, rapid change in the next 10 years. How do we bring the community along, right? I think if you look back to some of the earliest documents of both kind of UCAR related stuff in general, Unidata specifically, as you've shown here today, Jim, there were a lot more like resolutions passed or statements by committees to, I think, guide and help the community, because there was a lot of new stuff happening, right? This very new way of doing things, of sharing data. And that's largely gone by the wayside as things have matured and just things have operated well, right? And you get input in some of that, but we've not had that kind of statement level. And so just wondering from your years of kind of working in these realms, but also thinking about this rapid change in the future, how do we navigate this time as you know, a committee trying to help the community move where, you know, you're going to probably have to stop doing things in order to either start doing things or continue doing things you do better?
Yeah, that's a hard problem. I should deflect it back to Mohan. A couple of thoughts. One is that, you know, there are always people that want to be doing things the way that we did it a long time ago. That doesn't change. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to throw my course out and start over again. Another quick comment is sometimes it's important just to not get in the way, and young scientists today are coming in with talents and capabilities that you know I couldn't have dreamed of when I was a kid, and in some respects it's about supporting them. But another thing you could think of is a thought experiment. If we got 80 institutions together in a room like they did in 1983 and asked what are the critical challenges that we need to address over the next 5 to 10 years, you know, what would come out of that? You know, what would be the issues that would come up? In some respects, that's why these committees exist for Unidata, right? That's why you're all there. But I, you know, it would be very interesting to see if we had like a town hall at an AMS meeting, what would come up. But I think I would even think about doing something like that, but with the younger generations. Like for me, I'm 57 years old. I'm talking about the people that are in graduate school now. Mm-hmm. Get the graduate students together and find out, hey, what are the things that are keeping you from doing your science, or what are you really excited about, and where do you think the field's going to go in the near future? And maybe see what kind of ideas come out of that. I mean, for me, I just, you know, the simple thing is just to think about cloud computing and where that's going to go. But beyond that, I'm not sure. I mean, I would expect AI, for example, to be something that's going to get used a lot for helping students. In this big class I have, I would imagine having something where students are able to ask questions like I do ChatGPT, but maybe having a database, something that I've developed behind the scenes that's more specific and actually provides correct answers as opposed to what you get from ChatGPT, right? And those are the kind of things I think we're going to see more and more of. Or Unidata fits into that, I'm not really sure. I was always big on having more interactivity, like being able have students self-learn. So for example, there's a really simple example is having them be able to pull up a weather map for today, and they just learned, say, about vorticity, and they want to identify a vorticity maximum, and being able to like draw on the computer and say, is this a vorticity maximum? And the computer says, yes, you got that right. You know, that kind of a learning style is something that I've tried to build into my online class, so it's somewhat interactive. But I mean, that capability is not quite there yet, but I would love to be able to be able to do that kind of thing, where the computer is able to do it. Like you could build a, you know, like a GIF file now and say a certain area, if they touch here, then it says, yes, you got it right. But I'm talking about dynamic, like it's happening right now, whatever the weather is today, and the computer is able to kind of give you feedback. And I think we'll see more and more of that. You know, there's a lot of things happening in higher ed right now. Things are going to change dramatically. I think my guess is that you know, state legislatures are going to want to drive the price of higher ed down more. They're going to expect more innovation. Tenure as we know it is going to probably change pretty dramatically in the next 5 years. It's already changing in some states. And so I think there's going to be a lot of change, and you know, faculty are going to have to be able to adapt to the technology, or I think they're going to get left behind. I can see the writing on the wall here in Utah. I mean, basically we're moving to 5-year tenure reviews now, but they're building into those. You know, if you're not staying current and you're not teaching at a high level, we're going to be coming after you. That's kind of what I'm seeing. I think that's going to happen elsewhere. Maybe not everywhere, but elsewhere, for better or for worse. I didn't want to end on a negative note. But anyway, I actually am mostly excited about the future, but things are changing pretty rapidly. Yeah, if there's no more questions or discussion, I'm also happy to nod off, but I'm happy to take a question or two if there's anything else.
Let's Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it'll be a quick one. And again, this is very much talking my book. For graduate students you deal with, what is, as that landscape is changing fast, and you might have physics students, CS students, or atmospheric students, like what is like the biggest tech barrier that you run into today? I know that when I interact with students, you know, going through like a Linux file system is like an unknown orb for a lot of people. And then the other flip side, you know, is like, oh, I need everything as a GUI, or like, I don't, you know, I feel like the spectrum of computer skills is widening, not narrowing. And unsure if you have any 2 cents to offer from your observations at the U.
Yeah, this is, you know, I think actually cybersecurity is one of the biggest challenges that I deal with. It throws a lot of barriers at us in terms of how we do things. Our university was hacked about a year ago and had to pay $1 million ransomware payment. And as an outcome of that, our IT department, the university IT department, took over desktop support for everybody in the university. Whereas I used to work with people that actually knew Linux and other things and were pretty high level system administrators. I'm not dealing with that now, and it's a one-size-fits-all solution where, oh, we thought you only needed Microsoft Office kind of thing. And so I actually, and I don't want to throw the people in UIT under the bus. They're generally trying to be pretty helpful, but this has posed a lot of barriers for me in terms of how I even put IDV in a place where the students can use it. And that has limited to some degree what I can do in synoptic meteorology. And it's not going to get any better because, I mean, basically we have all kinds of cyber attacks here happening all the time. So that's one thing. And then, you know, I find that what do they call, like Canvas, you know, learning management system for the online class that I teach is just extremely limiting. And I've been really fortunate that the university gives me a support person to help me out. They're kind of excited about the class that we have, but there's just all kinds of ideas I have, and many of them I just can't do in that kind of a platform. And there's other platforms out there, but again, the university likes everybody to use the same one so that the students can easily transfer from them. I don't know if those are really big picture ones, but I think the cybersecurity one is a realistic one, that we have to have software systems that we're going to be able to make work in a much more stringent environment. And I don't know what those will be, but I find that actually is one of the biggest challenges I'm dealing with in the trenches right now.
And so are we, Jim.
Yeah, we actually, for example, for field work, it's especially challenging because they want this centralized group to see everything, including the laptops that we have in the field. And that's really a big problem when you're in the field and you need to get something installed or updated quickly. And they're working now on getting some fixes where we can have some limited administrator capabilities, but they really don't want anybody managing computers anymore other than their people. So
Jim, maybe one last thing to bring back something that I know has been happening at Unidata committee meetings for years. Don't know if it happened back in your day, but one last chance to do a blue sky. So a blue sky event where, you know, this beautiful thing of the future, you know, what's one thing that if you could change the world and make it happen, that would be the, you know, the ultimate that's related to kind of Unidata related stuff. What would that be, and describe that?
yeah, I joke. I used to say Bill Gates had a book out about 20 years ago. It's called Business at the Speed of Thought. And I always used to tell Unidata, I want science at the speed of thought, which is, you know, I don't want to write code. I just want stuff to happen, right? And we're kind of seeing that happening now. You can use ChatGPT to write code, and sometimes it does a good job, and sometimes it sends you down a rat hole for 3 days. But that's really what I want to be able to do is, you know, when I walk into the classroom, like today, for example, with Hurricane Helene, you know, I have most of my stuff is focused on mountain weather, but here's a great learning opportunity. And, you know, we did a decent job. There's stuff that's available on the web, but for me to spin up and focus, say, on what's going on in Helene, there's still barriers there. And I want to be able to just, whatever's exciting going on, be able to do it quickly. Or, you know, today I was teaching synoptic meteorology. We're talking about non-dimensional wave numbers. I want to be able to say to the computer, show me what wave number 0 to 5 looks like at 500 millibar heights right now, right? Rather than have to write a Python script to be able to do that. So take the GFS analysis, you know, apply a low pass filter and show me what wave 0 to 5 looks like right now. So we're going to get there, I think, but those are the kind of things I want to be able to do. Whatever I'm doing in class, I want to be able to quickly get something up rather than rely on either an IDV bundle that I've already developed or an analysis that I've already developed. It's the ability to do something new on the fly without having a code base, if that makes any sense. And, you know, I think with AI, we may get there. I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing some of, you know, over the last 15 or 20 years, I've seen that happening over time. We're getting closer and closer and closer to it. So when I was a kid, you know, the original Star Trek, the reruns were on all the time. And Captain Kirk would occasionally say computer, and he would tell it something, and it would go ding, 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 and then it would come back in some funny voice. That's my dream. I want to be Captain Kirk on the Enterprise, but in the classroom, right? And the computer does what I want. So.
Excellent. Thanks.
Well, again, thanks so much for the award. I like I said, I had no idea. And I also really appreciate being able to come in and talk with everybody like this and share some ideas, because I got an enormous amount out of being on both the user committee and what was then the policy committee. So thanks a lot. And thanks, Yuan, for IDV and everything you're doing on that. So.
Thank you, Jim. That's good.